Welcome to Media and Brain in the summer term 2020. Our topics today are in the Media and Brain lecture to give a general introduction into what are artificial conscious models actually. These are sometimes referred to as block and error models because they are usually not on the neuron level but rather on the functional level, creating systems of functions that interact with each other without actually trying to investigate what is the neural definition. So how could this be implemented with neural networks? Our focus is therefore to investigate what models do exist. There's, for example, the global workspace models of Bars and Shanahan. But based on that, we develop our own model. Which is something that is based on neurons, which is based on a general principle that it should be generative, or it has to be generative and completely, exclusively built from neurons, using the procedures that we are aware of today that are used in the brain. So it should be nothing that requires structures that cannot be implemented actually without neural networks. Okay, in order to provide the necessary input for your seminar, we will also investigate the brain. Of course, what are neurons? What layer structures can we find in the brain? Furthermore, we will have a look at perception and psychophysics. Perception is the part where actually physical stimuli are transformed into electrical signals that can be processed by the brain. And psychophysics tries to describe the laws behind this process. Very often the relationship of something physical to something perceived is a logarithmic one. There is the notion of Stevens exponent and Stevens curve, and that should also be something that you know before you go into the seminar. Furthermore, we will have a look at what similarity is, because it is the center process for semantic enrichment. We will therefore introduce the notion of the convolution operator, and that leads us directly to semantic enrichment. Here there's a connection between the semantics and the neurons, actually, because we will see that the neuron as we know it, the general interneuron that connects one layer with the other and does actually this process of enrichment very nicely, and the pathway is kind of a processing chain for the understanding of the stimuli provided at the input side. Once we have done that, we will round up by taking our artificial consciousness model and thinking about how it can be implemented with the methods that we know from the brain using similarity measurement techniques, and have a look at semantics and then further on at the lab course, which is writing a seminar paper. Okay, so to repeat that, our central thing is the model of artificial consciousness. We therefore have to understand what it means to create semantics. Semantics creation is based on similarity, comparing something that is new, some stimulus, to something that we already perceived and have learned which is often a weight vector, some norm as it is also called in psychology. Therefore, taking the input from one level to the other, semantic enrichment. And of course, you then will investigate in the seminar what can be done to identify the functions and to explain the functions that are essential for our understanding of consciousness, not just of artificial one. And we need, of course, the individual building blocks, the neurons. We have to understand a bit about psychophysics and perception. And one thing that is outside the normal curriculum are these tiers, these levels of brain building blocks. There's a difference between the neuron on the lower end and on the high end, the whole functional center, like the Wernicke area. Between these we have certain structures that we need, certain gates, for example, in order to do temporal processing, not to forget the input that already occurred and combining it with later input that comes along. A very successful model here in the area of artificial neural networks is the long short-term memory. We will have a look at that and extract the essential components of it and try to state a model that can produce language semantics in particular with such gated structures, also in a normal neural network, which could also be the brain, for example. And another example of a typical tier are the complex pattern generators that you have in the cerebellum, all of us, that trigger complex movement patterns, like for speech and for walking and other movements. Okay, so we try to bring a little bit of an order into that part, into that discussion of the brain, by starting with the simpler structures and moving upwards to the more complex ones over time. These are essentially the ingredients that will be provided for your seminar tasks in Media and Brain 1. Of course, if you want to hear more details, like for example, what type of norms do exist, how are they related to the way we describe concepts through prototypes and whatsoever, and other models, for example, of different forms of image theories, then you can go to Media and Brain 2, because in Media and Brain 2, we discussed those. Okay, now, what are the educational goals? Of this lecture? They are actually threefold. The first and foremost goal is to make you familiar with the notion of artificial consciousness. And not just artificial, but our entire understanding of consciousness. That is the most important. There are, as I said, several models. They are all rather high level. We want to go way deeper and argue for a model that is actually neural, that can be implemented with what we know about the brain, and that is able to express such complex behavior as, for example, inner speech and inner monitor, the execution of willpower, of goal setting, and of self-motivation. So all these are important functions of artificial consciousness. So this is, of course, the paramount goal, because it's the entry gate for the seminar tasks. The second important task is that you have a toolbox of neural network structures that includes an understanding of neurons on the normal, on the natural side, but also on the artificial sides. We have the artificial neural network, which is based on an idea of what the neuron could look like with a weighting function and aggregation plus a firing pattern, which is similar to the standard type of neuron that we have in the brain, but there are way more variations in neurons in nature. For example, there are different types of synapses, some of them excitatory, others inhibitory, and so it's more complex there. These, as well as I said, for example, the complex pattern generators and others, should form this toolbox of neural network methods. And the third goal, of course, is that you clearly understand the expectations and the goals of the seminar tasks. That is equally important as the two first goals. Yeah. So at the end of the lecture series today, or this in this term, you should have this toolbox that should help you with the task. And the goal of the task, the direction, is given by understanding what consciousness actually is. And we try to shed a little bit of light in how it could actually work. You will see in the course of the presentation that in many areas, in particular when it comes to consciousness, little is known. There is little hard scientific results. There are few results on which we can build. Most of the things we're discussing are actually theories. In these theories, there are always open points that have to be filled in the future. Of course, I will try to give you a description that is based on the scientific results as far as possible, but we have to accept that parts of the presentation are speculative. I try to declare that at points where we don't have scientific results, but where I just can give you my personal view, my personal opinion, and where we should actually also have starting points for discussion in the seminar. As I said in the pre-lecture meeting, this is an early, or actually a very early topic that we allow us to do at the end of the Master Studies course. It is currently not of the practical relevance, you know that as well, but we'll still try to do our best in order to come up with a model that explains as much of artificial consciousness as possible, while being only based on the notions of the evolution of the brain and of the components of the brain that actually exists, without imposing anything necessary, anything new that would currently actually not be available. I hope you had fun in the course. Since we cannot do it in presence form this time, I split up the presentation into a number of videos. The sequence of the videos is outlined textually in the forum, in the e-learning course forum. If you have any questions in the process of going through the videos or into the contents, then please post them in the forum associated to the videos, and if necessary, we will also try to assemble an FAQ, or if that is necessary, come together after Easter and have a discussion section where we can actually go through all open issues. Okay, having said that, I wish you much fun with the videos, and I hope that you learn something about your own level of consciousness and about what consciousness could actually be in human beings. Have fun.